Om Prithvi Shantirantariksha Shantir Dyav Shantir Disha Shantiravantara Disha Shantiragni Shantir Vayu Shantiraditya Shantish Chandrama Shantir Nakshatrani Shantirapa Shantiroshadaya Shantir Vanaspataya Shantir Gau Shantiraja Shantirashva Shantir Purusha Shantir Brahma Shantir Brahmana Shantir Shantireva Shanti Shantir Me Astu Shantihi. May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees, and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra sukhinas santu, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschid dukkha bhag bhavet, sarvastaratu durgani, sarvo bhadrani pashyatu, sarvas sadbuddhimapnotu, sarvas sarvatra nandatu. May all be happy and healthy. May all see what is good, and may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and compassion. And as we breathe out, let us release all the stress, anxiety, and exhaustion in the body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the divine presence can be felt most clearly in our own hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Om Asato Ma Satkamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravir Maheti Rudrayate Dakshinam Mukham Tenamam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. We begin today on verse number 247. So the section that we are studying is the analysis of this one Mahavakya, the profound statement, you are that. So here is a little background. The way the teaching was given in the Vedic times, whatever we know about it today from tradition. So the student goes to the teacher's place, stays there for a number of years. There were no schools per se to go to, but one had to go to the teacher's home, live there almost like a member of the family, do all the work, household chores, and then the teacher would give lessons. The very first lesson that was given was the Gayatri. The teacher taught the Gayatri prayer, and the student was expected to repeat it, to reflect on it, and then eventually to meditate on it. Then, looking at where the student stood, at what stage the student was in, then the teacher would give the first lesson. And it isn't as if as soon as the teacher said something, it would immediately make sense. Some of it might, some of it may not. Then the teacher would say, what I have told you now, reflect on it. And the student would keep on reflecting on it. And during the process of reflection, some questions might come, and then the student would get that clarified and continue the reflection. If needed, then the student would meditate on that truth. Then when the inner meaning of that teaching was revealed, then the teacher would give the next lesson and next lesson. So that's how the teaching was done. There wasn't any rigid thing. I mean, nowadays, the kind of system that we are accustomed to, we know that in a certain semester, a certain syllabus has to be completed. Whether or not, if you pay attention, if you do the diligent assignment, readings, etc., the chances are you will be able to follow it better. But the system itself doesn't wait. So some who neglect their studies or don't take it seriously may not grasp as much. Because clearly in a class there will be a number of students. Now that wasn't so much the case in ancient time. The teacher paid individual attention to every student, and there wasn't any particular time limit. So the teacher would not give the next lesson until the first lesson was complete. And so there's nothing we can do about it today because the system has changed and we are just a part of the system as it exists now. But I mention all this to show that after giving these initial lessons, when the teacher felt that the student is now ready for this highest teaching, then the teacher would tell the student, Tattvamasi, you are that. And if the student by then had reached that level of complete understanding, then there was nothing more to be done after that. As soon as the teacher told the student, you are that, Tattvamasi, at once the student realized the truth, Aham Brahmasmi, I am the Infinite One. That's it, all done. After that, the student has become infinite. So sometimes they jokingly said, the teacher would say, whatever this Guru Dakshina, whatever the fees to be paid, or whatever else you needed to do it before this teaching was given. Because after the teaching is gone, you are the only one infinite remaining. There's nothing much to be done after that. It was just said half jokingly. So this teaching, you are that, is said to be profound because essentially what it is saying, that infinite being whom we normally see as Ishvara, as God, the Supreme Lord, the Supreme Being, you are that Supreme Being. It's almost like someone telling you, you are God. It doesn't make sense. In fact, some people would be horrified by that. I may have mentioned this before, but very briefly, many years ago, probably now almost 15 and 20, almost close to 35 to 40 years ago, when I was in Chennai in southern India and I was editing a journal, and I received an article, an unpublished, a new find. It was a transcript of a lecture given by Swami Tyagananda, a great disciple of Ramakrishna in San Francisco. And the lecture was titled, How to Become God. It's quite a provocative title. Not like how to realize God, not to how to see God, how to become God. And clearly, an unpublished new find of a lecture given by a direct disciple of Ramakrishna, that's like, it's like almost like finding gold to an editor of a journal, because then you get to publish something which nobody knew even existed. So of course I was very happy to get that article. I published it alongside giving a short note about who Swami Tyagananda was and so on. And so this was done sometime in the late 1980s, I think. So this was almost like 60 or 70 years ago after Swami Tyagananda had passed away. This lecture was found in an archive. So one person, after the lecture was published, one person from New York, who was a great Krishna devotee, I got a very scathing letter from this person, extremely upset by that lecture, and saying, how dare you publish something like this? Such a sacrilegious thing. How to become God? Like, God is unique and God is supreme. There is no question of our becoming God. And so he was so upset that he didn't even read the whole thing fully, I guess. He was so upset just by the title. So he said, please give me the address of Swami Tyagananda. I want to have an open public debate with him on this. And I wrote to him a very polite reply saying, I'm sorry, I can't arrange this debate for you because Swami Tyagananda passed away 70 years ago. And I said, there is no question of me issuing a public apology for publishing it. I stand by every word that is in it. That made him even more mad. And I didn't want to go into any big debate about it. But I mention all this to show how heretical it'll sound to people, how to become God. And essentially, not exactly in the same way, but this is what the statement is. You are that. You, in whichever way you understand yourself now, you are this infinite being. And what this section is doing is that this doesn't make sense really. But if this kind of a statement was made by some person, an insane person, a person who was intoxicated maybe, then we would just kind of laugh it off and say it's a stupid statement and don't think about it again. But then when we find a statement like this is in the Vedas, and if we trust that the Vedas are filled with wisdom, then we have to pause and say, right away, it doesn't make sense. But if it's in the Vedas, maybe I need to reflect on it a little bit more. And that's essentially the topic that we are going to see today. the difference between the literal meaning of a statement and the implied meaning. If something does not make sense literally, then we have to pause and say, is there any implied meaning involved? Maybe the statement was not meant to be taken literally. Maybe some other meaning is to be derived from it. And in our daily life, we do say things which are not really to be taken literally. For instance, if something terrible has happened or terrible, you hear some bad news, and sometimes people say, I don't want to hear about it. I wish I were dead. Now, this statement, I wish I were dead, this person mostly, I can guarantee you, nobody is taking it, saying it in a literal sense. They're like, if suppose death were to come and said, oh, you wish to be dead? Okay, I am here to take you. And one said, no, I really didn't mean it literally. But we do say that. So the literal meaning is not to be accepted here. The implied meaning is, I'd rather not hear it. I wish I were not here. That's the idea. So in this case, we reject the literal meaning and accept the implied meaning. And you'll find hundreds of such examples in our daily life which we use. For instance, sometimes we say, where does this road go? No, literally, we said, no, the road doesn't go anywhere. The road is always here. But what we really mean is, if I go on this road, where will I go? Where will I reach? Where will this, even the language itself, where will this road take me? The road doesn't take us anywhere. The road is just lying there, lifeless. We take ourselves on that. Things like that. Or sometimes we speak about I'm taking this class. Now again, class is not some kind of an object that can be given or taken. So again, if you take it literally, it doesn't make sense. So you have to take the idiomatic usage of it, or at least take the implied meaning of it. So just as we have these kind of statements in our regular daily conversations, similarly, this statement, you are that, literally doesn't make sense. So what is the implied meaning? That is going to be discussed here. So let's look at verse 247. Tatastutau lakshanaya sulakshyau tayor akhandaika rasatva siddhaye nalam jahatya na tatha ajahatya kintu ubhayarthaika tayeva bhavyam. In order to realize their absolute identity, the two, that is Tat and Tvam, the Lord and the embodied self, therefore should be carefully considered through their implied meanings. Neither the method of rejection nor that of retention is helpful. One must use the method that combines the two. So, look at the notes here. They are very helpful. The examples given are the examples given in traditional Sanskrit texts. So let me read it fully. When the literal meaning does not make sense, the implied meaning usually does. There are three primary methods of arriving at the implied meaning. Now, each of the method is called lakshana. The method of rejection, jahat, retention, ajahat, and part rejection, part retention, it's called jahat ajahat. So there are three different methods are described here. And we'll see the examples, it will become clear. One, the phrase Gangayam Ghoshaha, literally meaning a village of cowherds in the Ganges. Its implied meaning is that the village is on the Ganges. To make sense, in is rejected and substituted by on. So this simple phrase in Sanskrit, Gangayam Ghoshaha, literally meaning that the village is in the Ganges. And of course, what we do, implication is, unless it's like some kind of a floating thing, that's not really the intended meaning, that it is on the bank of the village. So that is the idea. For instance, sometimes we say, our river, oftentimes it is on this or in that. It doesn't literally mean on the river itself, but on the bank of the river. That's the idea. So you reject what is given in the statement in and substitute it by a different word. So that's the first method, rejection, jahat. The second is retention, to make sense. The phrase shveto dhavati, literally meaning a white is running, its implied meaning from the context is that a white horse is running. To make sense, white is retained, but a horse is added to it. So imagine, let's say, two people who are at a farm where horses are there, and they're talking about horses. And so one of them says, "Oh, look, that the white one is running." Now, while he's saying that statement, a third person joins in, who has no idea about the context because he hasn't heard what has been said before. All that this person hears is, the white is running. Doesn't make sense, white is running. And then you say, oh, they're looking at these horses and they're talking about it. So maybe what they're really meaning is that the white horse is running. And so here, you're not rejecting anything in the original statement, but actually you are adding something to it. And so that's another way, a second way of making sense of a statement which doesn't make sense literally. So we have seen two methods. One, if a statement doesn't make sense, you reject a part of that statement and substitute it by something else. The second method is, you don't reject anything, but you add something to it to make sense. And then there is a third method, in which case you partly, it's a kind of combination of the two methods. You keep a part of it and you reject another part of it. And that example is given in the next two verses, 248 to 49. So let me read those. Sadevadattoyam itiha chaikata viruddha dharmamshamapasya kathyate yatha tatha tatvamasiti vakye viruddha dharman ubhayatra hitva samlakshya chinmatrataya sadatmanoh akhanda bhava paridhiyate budhaihi evam mahavakya shatena kathyate brahmat manoreikyam akhanda bhavaha. In the statement, this is that Devadatta. The identity of Devadatta is affirmed after rejecting the contradictory attributes. In the same way, in the statement you are that, the contradictory attributes are rejected from both, meaning the Lord and the embodied self, and observing carefully their essence as consciousness, the identity of Brahman and Atman is recognized by the wise. Thus, hundreds of scriptural texts declare the absolute oneness of Brahman and Atman. So, think about it this way. Let's say that you met someone in New York. You had gone to visit New York, say 10 years ago, and you met someone, and the name given here is Devadatta. It's kind of a name that often comes in old texts. So let's say someone named Devadatta. So you met a Devadatta 10 years ago when you visited New York. And then you lost touch with this person. And then 10 years later, you are going for a walk along the Charles, and someone comes and says, "Hey, how are you?" And then you're not immediately able to know, who is this person? And then you looking at your expression on your face, then this person says, "Don't you remember we met in New York 10 years ago?" And he said, "Oh, you are that Devadatta." That's the kind of the situation. So now the question is, the Devadatta I met 10 years ago in New York, and the Devadatta I'm meeting now, 10 years later in Boston, apparently two different people. That person I met 10 years ago in a different place, or different place, different time, I met someone. This person I'm meeting in a different place, different time. 2012, New York, that person. 2022, Boston, this person. Are these two people? And we would say, of course not. They're the same person. So, a person in a different time and place is the same person which is I'm seeing now in a different time and place. And how am I able to arrive at that conclusion that it's the same person? And the reason I'm able to arrive, apparently it seems to be so common sense really, but it's good to kind of analyze it, that I know it's the same person because the details regarding time and place are not intrinsic to the identity of this person. That this person will remain this person, whether this person is in Boston or in New York or Los Angeles. The person doesn't change. The place may change. I may meet this person 10 years ago or 10 years or 15 years later. Time may change, place may change, but the person is the same. So, how did I arrive at this conclusion? That this is that Devadatta, that is the same person, by eliminating the non-important, non-essential parts and holding on to the essential part, which is the person is the same. Does this make sense up to this point? Okay. Now, exactly in the same way, when the teacher says, you are that, there are apparently two different things. You, Devadatta in New York 10 years ago, and that, Devadatta in Boston 10 years after. Now, apparently two different things. But just as in that statement, we eliminated the non-essential parts and focused on the essential identity of the two, in the same way, we look at these, what makes me, the jiva, the embodied self, different from the Paramatma. The jivatma is different from the Paramatma. The embodied self, the individual self, is different from the Supreme Self. In other words, what makes the Supreme Self supreme? And we can immediately point out a lot of things. First of all, I can say that I am mortal, limited lifespan. God doesn't die. God was never born. So God is infinite lifespan. That's a big difference. My power is so little. I may be able to lift a few pounds, but more than that I can't do anything. So everything, physically, mentally, emotionally, intellectually, our power is limited. But the Supreme Being, unlimited power. Knowledge. My knowledge, no matter how we might be a genius, but still, compared to the knowledge of God, our knowledge is still limited. So our knowledge is limited, power is limited, life is limited. And in God's case, all of these are unlimited. Then the question comes is, are these intrinsic to my identity? If my power goes away, am I still me? Is my identity rooted in how long I live, or how much power I have, or how much knowledge I have. And so, through reflection, it is found that things like these, things that make me small and things that make the Supreme Supreme, are not essential attributes of our existence. The only thing that is essential, the essence of my being, of the Atman, is pure consciousness. Chit, Sat Chit Ananda, the Chit aspect. And the essence of the Supreme Being is also this pure consciousness. So, consciousness is same, and what is superimposed on this consciousness, just to kind of make superimposed on these consciousnesses, if you like, there is no plural there. Consciousness is always singular. But if you want to think about it as, at least in our present perception, two different entities, the Supreme Being, the individual being, essentially it's just one big ocean of consciousness. And in one section of it, it appears as if one little wave in that ocean of consciousness, the wave is limited. The wave has a separate identity. The wave is not as big as the ocean. The wave is not as powerful as the ocean. The ocean always is. The wave dies after some time. The waves gets merges after a while. And yet, as water, they are completely identical. Exactly in the same way, as pure consciousness, I, as consciousness, and God, as consciousness, are not two different forms of consciousness. Consciousness is one. What distinguishes me from the wave, from the ocean, is just this little form, these little limitations. But these limitations are superimposed on the consciousness, just as the snake is superimposed on a rope. And just as the snake is not real, these limitations are not real either. So even when we think of God in a certain form, as Shiva or Vishnu or Buddha, it's not that we are rejecting those forms. All that we can say is those forms of the divine are as real as my own form. As long as my own physical form, my own mind, my own qualities make sense to me, they have some meaning for me, till that time, the form of the divine, the qualities of the divine will make some sense. In fact, as long as I'm aware of my form and it makes sense or it has meaning for me, even though I may intellectually try to think of the impersonal divine, my mind, when it tries to think of that impersonal, will kind of personalize it in some way or the other. By that I mean that as long as I'm a person, the Supreme Being I worship will also be some kind of a person. The two are related. So in order to completely see that ultimate reality as impersonal, I have to become impersonal myself. In other words, my own limitations, my own form, my own personhood has to somehow go into the background or no longer be so real, only then the personhood of God will not be so real. Because sometimes people do have this kind of a conflict between the personal God and the impersonal God. That was also the question that Sri Ramakrishna asked M during one of his early visits. One of the first questions that Sri Ramakrishna asked M in the Gospel of Ramakrishna was, do you believe in God with form or without form? In other words, do you believe in a personal God or impersonal God? Now, M had his choice. M had his preferences. He said that he likes to think of God in an impersonal way. But before that, M has this question. That is, do we really have a choice? Is there really God with form and God without form? Is there really a personal God and impersonal God? And do I make that choice? And what I'm trying to suggest here is that we may think that we are choosing this way of thinking or that way of thinking. But really, we are not choosing anything. In fact, just take a simple example. And this might seem rather frivolous, but it's like if you go to just buy anything, maybe some clothes or shoes or let's say you want to buy shoes, pair of shoes, and you go to a shop, and of course they will immediately ask you what kind of shoes you need. They'll take your measurements and then they'll put a few pairs before you, and you try them on, and eventually you decide, okay, I'm going to buy this one. Now, it might seem as if you made the choice. There were all these different pairs, and you could have chosen any of those, but you thought about it, then you chose one of those pairs. So you made a choice. And that's what probably all of us would think. But there's another way of looking at it. And that is, when we go to buy shoes, or go to buy anything for that matter, most of us already have some fixed ideas in our mind about what I want, what kind of thing I want, or whether rightly or wrongly, we have our own likes and dislikes, our own biases and prejudices. We somehow have our own idea, oh, this color looks good on me. Or many people have told me that this particular pairs of shoes are the right shoes. So we could have gotten this information from the opinions of other people. We might have read about it, read reviews about it. Whichever way, we have formed certain ideas that this style, this color is what I want. So we have already gone with some, as they say, in like pre-existing conditions. So we already have some fixed ideas about what we want. We think we are choosing, but really we are choosing based on these already existing parameters we have in our mind. In other words, from among those different pairs of shoes in front of me, I could not have chosen any shoes other than the one I picked. So it wasn't really so much my choice. It was these existing ideas in my head which made me choose that. Although we still have the illusion that I made the choice. Exactly in the same way, sure, there are the many different ways of thinking about God. I might think of God with form or with qualities. I might think of God without form, without quality. And with form, of course, then there could be so many different forms. That's why some are, for instance, among those who worship God with form, some worship Shiva, Vishnu, Devi, Ramakrishna, Buddha, Jesus. There are so many different forms of the divine that we adore, that we worship. Now and of course, childish people fight over it and say, oh, this is superior and this is better and that and so on. But that's pointless. It's like, for me, with my existing impressions in my mind, one of these forms, I will be attracted to it naturally, effortlessly. People read the 4 yogas of Vivekananda, and sometimes people ask, which one should I practice? No, it's not a matter of choice so much. When you read all the 4, it's possible that some 1 or 2 or more, maybe in your case, maybe all 4, will resonate with you more. So some people feel, oh, Jnana Yoga, somehow it just makes sense to me. For someone else could be Raja Yoga, someone else could be Karma Yoga, for someone else could be Bhakti Yoga. So there's something within us that responds to this external thing. And so with God, with form, without form, personal, impersonal, it's this response from within. That is why we feel that sense of connection to thinking of God in a particular way. And what I'm suggesting here is, as long as we are a person, in one way or the other, it will be personal God that will be our focus of attention and adoration. And as we evolve, as we change, as we grow, the divine I worship will correspondingly change along with me. Essentially, it's not the divine who is changing, it's my understanding, my perception that is changing. I mean, think about the toys we play with, the hobbies that we have. The toys that we play with when we were 5-year-old and 10-year-old, they become useless when you become a teenager. At that time, you need different toys. That time, maybe you just kind of pass them on to your younger siblings at home. Or if they're not there, you just kind of give it away to Salvation Army or something like that. And as we grow older, that's how we have, with age, with different interests in life, the things that become meaningful to us change throughout our lives. Same thing with regard to God. There is one beautiful book, if you are interested in reading, it's titled Evolution of God. I forget the name of the author. If you want to know, maybe you can, if you email me, I'll send you the name. It's a great book, and it's essentially, there is a lecture that Swami Vivekananda gave in his Jnana Yoga book. It is, I think it's titled something like, I wish I had the exact title. The idea is evolution in the ideal, how our idea of God evolves as we evolve. And so it's completely understandable why different people worship and feel connection with different ways of thinking of the divine. That even though all of us might use the same word God, the way we think about God, the way God becomes meaningful to us will be different depending on whichever state of evolution we are as individuals. And so what this statement shows is that all of these changes that are occurring within me and the corresponding changes are occurring in the divine that I worship, none of these changes are intrinsic to my own identity, to my own existence. Throughout my life, things that made sense to me, the toys I played with, the games I played with, they have changed over the years. But I as a person, I'm still the same person. Yes, I have grown older, I have hopefully grown wiser, but still the same person, in spite of many other things that have changed in my life. And so, just as those things were not intrinsic to my identity, the person is the same, exactly in the same way. When you look at you are that, the things that are not intrinsic to you, the things that are not intrinsic to that, if these non-intrinsic details are removed, we'll see that they are one and the same. It's almost like saying the wave is the ocean. Again, wouldn't make sense. A wave is so tiny, ocean is so big. But then you look deeply and say, what is this wave really? It's just water. What is this ocean really? It's just water. You take a little bit of the wave in your hand and you just see water. You take a little part of the ocean in your hand and you just see water. And you can't distinguish between a wave water and the ocean water. It's just water. That's how it is. That's what is meant by oneness. That is what is meant by not two. That me and that are not two distinct entities. The wave and the ocean are not two different things. They are just one, the water. So similarly, this entire existence is just Chaitanya, consciousness. And in that consciousness, we have all these different waves. And a certain wave I see, oh, this wave is a human being, this wave is a dog, this wave is a chair, this wave is a piano, this wave is this. And essentially, we are getting so distracted by these waves. All that we need to do is to remove these forms and then see there is just the water. So similarly, if we eliminate all these names and forms that we experience, both in our waking as well as in our dream states, what will remain? Although we are calling it consciousness, because we need to use some word, we need to call it by some name. But essentially it is beyond name and form. So what remains cannot really be vocalized, cannot really be said. And that's why in that ultimate state of experience of that oneness, the Vedas simply say, Shantam, just silence, the holy silence. Words, the sound, is really what breaks that silence, breaks that oneness. Although, even though we are talking about non-duality all the time here, but there is so much sound. I'm like speaking continuously. The best teaching would be in complete silence. In fact, there is this one great composition of Shankaracharya. It's called Dakshinamurti Stotra, in which he says, Gurostu maunam vyakhyanam, shishyastu chinna samshayaha. It's a beautiful one, 2 lines in that verse, which says, Gurostu maunam vyakhyanam, the lecture, the talk that the guru gave, that the teacher gave, was silence. So the teaching was in silence. Shishyastu chinna samshayaha. Shishyaha, the students, samshayas mean doubts. All the doubts in the minds of the students were completely removed. So the discourse was silence and all the doubts were removed. We haven't reached that stage yet. And so lots of words, lots of sounds. And so if you have any doubts now, you'll have to use words as well. So let's do it. Maybe eventually, at some point, we will reach a stage when I can just come here and just sit. And you can just come and sit. And then after an hour, just go and then say, oh, all my doubts are gone. That day will come, but we need to prepare ourselves for it. So let me just quickly read this note and then we will close for today. In the sentence, this is that Devadatta, this person, Devadatta, seen at this place at this time, is compared with that Devadatta, seen at that other place and at that other time. After rejecting the differences in the non-intrinsic details of time and place, while retaining the intrinsic identity of the person, this Devadatta is recognized to be the same as that Devadatta. In the statement, you are that, Tattvamasi, you, Tvam, the embodied self or Jiva, with a limited lifespan, knowledge and power, is compared with that, Tat, the Lord or Ishvara, with infinite lifespan, knowledge and power. After rejecting the differences in the non-intrinsic details of lifespan, knowledge and power, while retaining their intrinsic identities rooted in consciousness, the two are seen to be one and the same being. Every Vedic statement that affirms the oneness of Brahman and Atman is known as a Mahavakya, profound statement. The usually cited four among these are representative samples from the four Vedas. Rigveda, consciousness is Brahman, Prajnanam Brahma. Yajurveda, I am Brahman, Aham Brahmasmi. Samaveda, you are that, Tattvamasi. Atharva Veda, this Atman is Brahman, Ayam Atma Brahma. So, give some thought to this. It's not that complicated. It's just that we need to train ourselves to think this way. And then this idea then will get further clarified as we discuss it in the coming weeks. So if you have any doubts or questions or ideas, feel free to ask.
Namaskar Maharaj. You told that the wave and the water are same, because you take some wave in the hand, it becomes water.
It doesn't become water, it is already water.
It is already water. So it's the same. Now, I want to bring something which I couldn't understand. Maya and this embodiment are the superimposition that Maya does to this embodiment. That is, so that makes Maya and this embodiment both unreal.
Mm-hmm.
And Maya also does hiding the consciousness from us by superimposition. So I thought Maya, so Maya is unreal in that case.
Mm-hmm.
So is it like Prakriti and Purush? Like,
no, my point is, see, today's all this I said, I did not use the word Maya. I did not bring Prakriti. I did not use Purusha. So why are you complicating it?
Because it was from last week's discussion.
Yes. So what happens is, sometimes we bring these categories and complicate it further. Because Purusha simply means pure consciousness.
Yes.
Prakriti is a different word, again, meaning Maya. Again, in different contexts, sometimes in other philosophies, the word might be used in a different sense. But essentially, it is the material manifestation, if you like. Both, whether you call it Prakriti or Maya, essentially is ignorance or product of ignorance.
Yes.
And ignorance ultimately is not real, because the only reality is consciousness. And everything other than consciousness is superimposed. You can call it Prakriti, you can call it Maya, you can call it whatever you want. But consciousness or the ocean alone exists. And the waves are the limitations in the terms of form and name that we give to it, is a product of ignorance.
Okay.
That is it. And so I think it will be helpful as far as possible to kind of look at the meaning of many of these terms and then keep it simple. Because sometimes what happens, and I understand, please sit down. I understand the problem is that many of us are reading a lot of books, hearing different lectures given in different times. And the books or many of these lectures, people do use Purusha, Prakriti, Shakti, Maya. And then it's like our head like, oh, so this is this and this is that, and where does it all fit? You see? So these kind of questions come. And so that's a little bit of a problem in a sense that, please sit down, that as I said, and that's the kind of both the blessing and the curse of the times in which we are. In olden times, as I began today by saying, a student went the teacher's place. That time the only way the student could hear anything was from the teacher. So the teacher said, whatever terms the teacher introduced, the teacher then said, this is what it is, this is how it is connected. There were no other 10 books to refer to, no library to go to, no podcasts, no lectures, no YouTube, there was nothing. So it was simpler. The times in which we live, the blessing is easy accessibility. We don't have to go in search of some teacher on top of a mountain or in some forest. Right now, if you have a computer, you have an internet, Google, and then lots of things are available. Go to a bookshop, you can buy books and read it. So that's the easy accessibility is a blessing. The disadvantage in that is different books or different talks given from different, they all may be good. It's not that they are wrong or bad or anything. They all may be perfect. But given based on different worldview or different approach or a different context, they might use different terms. So then what happens is all of those different words are going in the same head. So morning I read something about Purusha and Prakriti. Evening then I read suddenly about this Jivatma, Paramatma. And then suddenly you say, where does all this fit together? Because then and so I don't have any easy solution for this other than saying and this is going to sound horrible, but don't read too much. Now, I must qualify that statement. What I mean is, be selective, be choosy about what you want to read, what you want to hear. I think we have to be judicious about what we go, because the problem is, I mean, think about it this way. When you are cooking, and if you are a good cook, your kitchen may be filled with lots of vegetables and lots of different spices. But you don't randomly just take them, you just put it and they say, oh, delicious dish. Doesn't happen that way. We know that we want to cook something, okay, for this thing, only this spice will work. I can use only these things. And then we are very picky, we are very choosy about what is going to create this beautiful dish. A lot of this understanding about ourselves and about God is a little bit like that. There are lots of ingredients in this spiritual kitchen, and there are lots of different concepts and lots of different ideas. We cannot at random pick them up and put them and say, oh, why it doesn't make sense? Of course, they're not going to make sense. So I would say, if I want to cook a Vivekachudamani dish, then what kind of spices I need, what kind of things I need. I mean, you kind of get the point.
Actually, I remember what I read in Bhagavad Gita at one point, Prakriti, when we can identify difference of Prakriti and Purush, then we get, moksha. So they're two different things.
Yes, again, correct. So, the problem is also this, that the word Purusha, the word Prakriti, are not some kind of technical terms. They are also common words in Sanskrit language. So, sometimes the word you might find in the Gita, Purusha and Prakriti, you might find a similar word then used in some book in Sankhya. You might find the same word, sometimes the similar words are used in Buddhist literature, in Jain literature. The words are same, but the sense in which it is used may not be same. So just because I have read Prakriti, even English word for that matter, the consciousness is the most problematic word. Nowadays, scientists are speaking about consciousness. Vedanta is speaking about consciousness. Buddhists speak about consciousness. Now, if we think that every time a person uses the word consciousness, they mean exactly the same thing, we'll be mistaken. Again, it's very different ways the same word is used. So that's why I said, don't get caught up in words. Actually, in this book itself, you might remember in the beginning of Vivekachudamani, Shankaracharya uses this phrase, I don't remember the exact verse number. He says, Shabdajalam Maharanyam. Maharanyam, this is the huge forest of Shabda. This network of words is like entering into a huge forest, and we can easily get lost into it. And that is why I said to be choosy in what we want to read. Because sometimes it's good. The more widely read we are, that's always wonderful. But if I cannot digest the different things I read, and not just digest in the sense of understand, but kind of connect the two. Otherwise, what will happen is my head will be filled with ideas, but there's such a hodgepodge there because, this is what I read in Tibetan Buddhism, this is what I read in Zen, this is what I read here, this is what I read there. And I have no idea how these different ideas, are they related? Or how in what way do I understand them? So it's almost like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. Now, if I can piece together a puzzle well, will all those ideas fit well, then it will be a beautiful picture. And that is what we want in our life to have. That all the different ideas that we have picked up in different places, each of that idea can be as a piece of a jigsaw puzzle. And what we want is somehow to make sense of that. Now what happens is, if I have mixed together two different jigsaw puzzles, say I bought one and then another one, and then out of carelessness, pieces from this and this have gotten mixed. Now, each of those pieces is valuable. It'll make a good picture in some different puzzle. But now by mistake it has come into this box, and I'm wondering, where does this piece go? It doesn't fit into it. It's not going to fit into it. It's not a part of this puzzle. And that is why it's good to be a little bit choosy about what we read. Even if we read something from a completely different point of view, we must at least know how those ideas in that particular text are related to the ideas I already have in my head. Because if I'm not able to connect the two, it's going to be tough. And that it's not even about reading different books. It's also reading from the same book. That's why people who read the Gospel of Ramakrishna, for instance, or any of the Vedanta literature, again, not a good idea to read too much at a time. Just like it's not a good idea to eat too much at a time. If you eat too much, we may not be able to digest it. If I read too much, my mind may not be able to digest it. So a good practice is, especially texts like this, it's not like suddenly you read 15 verses from the book and say, okay, now I know what it is. No, it doesn't work that way. They say Swami Tyagananda, great disciple of Ramakrishna, went to the river Narmada in central India, and he would take this text, Vivekachudamani, and he said he would read one verse and meditate, and not go to the next verse until the meaning of this first verse had become clear to him. So it's not about how much we read. We can read little, but even if we read little, digesting that little would mean giving some thought to it, reflecting over it. Even if our understanding may not be perfect, we'll have to revisit that passage more often. But at least I've spent some time thinking about it, meditating on it. Then we'll have some amount of clarity, and that'll help. So that is my message for today, is don't read too much. As it is, look at it this way. Most of us don't have enough time, first of all. There are hundreds of things we need to attend to. So in the limited time that we have, use that time intelligently, use that time well. And in the beginning of our spiritual quest, out of curiosity or even trying to figure out the lay of the land, like what things are available, it's understandable that we might read a bunch of things. Now, eventually, at some point in our spiritual journey, when we have found, okay, this is what makes sense to me, then just stay there and go on digging deep, deep, deep. Because only then that water will come. And I'll just before I end, I'll just briefly mention, and this happened when I was very young. I was barely 19 years old, and I'd gone to the monastery when I joined the monastery there. So one of the Swamis told me this. And at that time, I wasn't very happy with that instruction. And that Swami said, okay, he gave me this. That time there were 8 volumes of Swami Vivekananda's complete works. And now there are 9. One more volume has been added afterwards. So he said, now for some time, don't read any other book. Just read this book from beginning, first page of the first volume to the last page of the last volume. Now see, I was young and I was like, why shouldn't I read it? I didn't revolt, I didn't argue, but a part of me I felt, this looks very, it's almost like very sectarian. It's like, oh, only read this book, don't read anything else. But I did follow that advice. And it did help a lot. What it did is it created a very strong foundation where I could hold on to a certain way of understanding myself, understanding the world, understanding the divine, understanding the purpose of existence. And once that foundation had been strengthened, then it was so much more easier to kind of spread your wings and read other texts, because then your foundation is strong. Then you know that whatever new ideas come, you have some reference point to go to and see where it fits in the kind of structure that's already been formed in your head. And so just think about it. Think about your reading habits. Think about how much of it is helping deepen your spiritual life. So it's not just about widening our horizon, it's also about deepening our life. And as I said, for all of us, irrespective of our circumstances, our age, and whatever other things, for all of us, time is limited, energy is limited. So let's try to use it as best we can. I'm sorry I went on a big rant about this, but I thought this needed to be said, needed to be remembered by all of us. Because it's, I think, very helpful. So we will stop here today, and when we meet next week, we'll begin with verse 250. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhurmuhu. On Sunday, our subject will be a verse from the Ramayana. Next Wednesday, we'll continue this discussion. And on Saturday, our meditation will be at 6 o'clock. So you're welcome for these programs. We'll conclude with a prayer now. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be